It is a frigid day for North Carolina. My heater is working overtime, and this car has to get done. Stick around while I continue the reassembly on my 1987 Porsche 944 Turbo. To the northeast, this just may seem like your normal winter day, but in North Carolina, we've had some pretty frigid, snowy days here in North Carolina recently. But I can't let that stop me because this car has to get finished. You know the saying, when it rains and pours. Well, over this past week, it's been... You call this a storm? Out of the 5 cars I own, only 1 is drivable right now. The 944 is how you see it. The BMW, well, that never ran from the day I bought it. My son's A5, PCV valve failure. And my wife's 2023 Durango, coolant hose exploded 2 days ago. My car's a big piece of shit. The only functional car I have at my house right now is my 2015 RS5. And that means that I need to finish this car as soon as possible because, quite frankly, I need it off of these quick jacks so that I can move this car out of the garage and pull another one in here to do work on it as needed. So in my last video, I reinstalled the heat shield for the AOS as well as the J-boot, and I started to work on finagling some of these wires and vacuum hoses where they need to go in preparation for getting the intake manifold reinstalled. But first things first, I need to get all of the wiring and vacuum lines that are along the firewall situated because once that intake manifold is on, I have limited room back against that firewall to put things where they need to be. So I have the car on its highest level on the quick jacks right now. So I need to lower it down to the lower stop so it's a lot easier for me to bend over the fenders and the front of the car and reach things so that I can get them in the position that they need to be. So as you can see, the car is a little bit lower now and much easier for me to reach into the back here and move things around where they need to be. So everything from the vacuum lines to the new Kroon wiring harness. As I said in a previous video, I need to get this bent down to where this clamp will be able to mount to the intake manifold when I have it installed. What I really need to do is get a lot of these other harnesses out of the way, like the speed and reference sensor connectors, the O2 sensor connector, as well as the cycling valve connector. And I need to figure out what I want to do with this because I am not using it anymore because I have a manual boost controller. So I want to make sure that nothing happens to this, so I'll probably end up wrapping it in some black tape or something and then zip tying it down out of the way so that in the event, if someday I ever want to return this car to its stock form, I can do so.
That's not going to happen.
Okay, so I think I have everything situated to where I need it to be. So the speed and the reference sensor connectors that come from the DME harness, I have placed over here as well as the connector for the O2 sensor. On the other side, I have the plugs for the speed and reference sensors themselves, as well as from the O2 sensor. Now, if you can see, I did put a B on this top connector. If you look on the top of the speed and reference sensor bracket, the closest to the front of the engine is labeled BG, and the one further back is DG. Now, the one closest to the front is the reference sensor. It references top dead center. The one further to the rear is the speed sensor. It is measuring the speed of the ring gear as it rotates. So a common no-start condition on these cars is when you have these plugs reversed on the actual sensor plugs. But Kroon does a very good job of actually labeling all of the wiring. That's the O2 sensor, that one is the reference sensor, and that one is the speed sensor. But since I have everything out of the way, I think I'm ready to get this intake manifold installed. All right, so the intake manifold is installed. I have all of the bolts in and torqued down to 15 foot-pounds. I have this throttle cable bracket installed. I have the dipstick tube and the dipstick reinstalled.
You're a dipstick!
I have all the vacuum lines ran underneath. This is one thing I'm not a fan of because I have these aftermarket silicone hoses and this aftermarket J-boot. This hose that comes from the AOS kind of puts some pressure on the wires here for this. I tried to route it on this side of the hose and it was kind of even worse. So I'm just going to have to live with it. I guess it is what it is, but I was able to get a good connection on here, so I'm going to roll with that. Now, the next thing is very important for you folks that are interested in getting an aftermarket turbo like the Raptor X that I have. The turbo thermostat does have to be moved slightly to the left, and because of that, you cannot get to this mounting bolt here on the front of the intake manifold. So what I do is I loosen it just enough so that I can get the intake manifold to rest down in the U channel, and it just has to act as a support. And honestly, this thing isn't going anywhere and it's good enough. There's just no way to get a 13mm wrench or a 13mm socket on this bolt with this thermostat moved in the position that it is. I also have these two vacuum lines hooked up and the clamps tightened down. I have these two vacuum lines, including the one from the KLR, on the banjo bolts, and those are both tightened down. I have this clamp installed on the wiring harness, so it is good and secure, as well as the fuel injector wiring. I still need to hook up the speed and reference sensor connectors, as well as the O2 sensor connector. But I think my next step is I'm going to raise the car back up to its highest point on the quick jacks, because I need to get underneath the car and install the O2 sensor. But before I do that, if you guys remember, there is that black bracket that these two bolts bolt to in the back of the intake manifold. I left it loose underneath so that I had a little bit more wiggle room to get these bolts to line up. So now it's time for me to raise the car back up, get the bolts underneath tightened up on the AOS heat shield, as well as that intake manifold support bracket, get the O2 sensor installed. I also have a couple of heat shields that need to go back on, as well as the duct for the back of the alternator. And once that's done, I should be all set underneath the car, and then I can finish up things up top. Here I am again underneath the car, and it looks like I made another error in my order of operations here. So you can see those two bolts. So the one on the right-hand side is going strictly through that AOS heat shield. The one on the left goes through that intake manifold support brace, as well as that AOS heat shield. And because I put the dipstick tube in, now I'm going to have quite a challenge to get a wrench on that bolt on the left. So I'm going to try my hardest. I really don't want to have to try to unbolt that dipstick tube and then remove it again, but if I have to, I will. And once those are done, I will get the O2 sensor installed back in its rightful position right there. I left it unplugged up on top because I'm going to have to do a lot of twisting on this wire, so hopefully it'll make it a little easier if it's able to move a little bit up top. But I'm going to get going on this. It's going to be extremely difficult to film any of it, so I'm going to get that done, and I will report back once I'm all set. I ended up really lucking out. I was able to get a 13mm wrench on both of those bolts, and then I was able to get the O2 sensor in the crossover pipe. So now my next order of operation is to get the heat shields in. So the first is that steering knuckle heat shield, and then there's also a heat shield that goes right here. So I'm going to get those installed, and then I need to put this cooling tube that goes up there to basically cool the back of the alternator. So I'm going to get all of those taken care of, and then I'll give you guys an update from there. I now have both heat shields installed, both the one for the steering knuckle as well as this one for the motor mount. So this one is super easy. That one is not. You have to kind of contort your arms a little bit, and I also have a little stubby 10mm that comes in really handy for getting the bolts tightened down. And I also have this tubing installed for the back of the alternator. It comes off of this hard tube here. This thing can be a real pain to get that on there, and I just have a zip tie holding it. I believe from the factory there was a ring clamp, but zip tie works just fine. This thing isn't going anywhere. So that should do it for underneath the car. So now it's time to take it back up top. All right, so I have the speed and reference sensors connected, and I have the bracket bolted to the intake manifold. I have the O2 sensor connected. I have all of the vacuum lines routed where I want them to be. And so the next step is to get the fuel injectors inside the fuel rail, get the fuel rail connected to the intake manifold and all bolted down, and then we'll go from there. When you're putting your injectors in, you want to make sure that the retaining clips go over both the fuel rail, so that little lip on the pocket that takes the fuel injector, you want to make sure that it's clipped on in there, as well as in the slot on your fuel injector. You should be able to spin it around, and if you go to tug on it, it should be locked in from this clip. So if you don't have this locked in, the next time you try to take out your fuel rail, that fuel injector is probably going to come out and it's going to dump gasoline all over your motor. So just make sure that both this retaining clip and your fuel injector can spin freely, and if you give it a tug, it should be in there snug, and this retainer keeps it from coming out. Is installed. All of the connectors are connected to all of the fuel injectors. I will say it's going to be a little bit of a challenge because those spring-loaded releases on these connectors are underneath. So I'm going to probably have to use some sort of plastic tool or something to reach underneath and then pry up on them and pull them out. So other than that, everything was pretty straightforward. Off camera, I did route and plug in all of the spark plug wires, and I'm sure if you have a 944 or at least an 8-valve 944, you'll know that routing these wires in through the fuel rail through this crossover pipe is not the most fun thing to do in the world. That is another area where maybe some of the 16-valve cars have a little bit of an advantage because the spark plug wires are just on top of the valve cover. So everything else is connected. One of the things I did want to point out, and I think a few of you might have noticed, this is actually an intake manifold off of either an 88 Turbo S or an 89 Turbo because it has the two valve ports right here on the intake manifold. So I bought it off of eBay. It was just kind of plain and ugly. I got an absolute steal. I think I paid $75 shipped for it. I then sent it to Plyhammer Parts to have it powder coated, and they sent it back and it looks absolutely fantastic. So there's really no benefit to this intake manifold off of the regular one other than you have two vacuum ports as opposed to just one. So you use kind of two single port banjo bolts as opposed to one double banjo bolt. And another thing that somebody pointed out, this was actually on Car Pokes, they did point out that I really didn't talk about whether I was going to leave the original connector that came from Kroon or if I was going to put that side mount connector on. Just for the sake of getting this car hooked up and getting it started and making sure everything runs correctly, I'm just going to use the regular one, and in the future I may move to the other one, but here's a good way to kind of show what I was talking about, where this one comes in from the top, the other connector comes in from the side, and you just push it down. So I have a feeling I'm going to update that in the future, but for right now, I'm just going to leave it like that. So next, I'm going to get the bottom half of the air box that has the airflow meter attached to it. I'm going to get that connected to the J-boot and all bolted down onto its mounts. And then I will tackle this charge pipe that goes from the outlet of the intercooler to the throttle body and get these vacuum lines connected. And then I'll decide where to go from there. So I'm afraid I am at an impasse. I cannot figure out how to route this AFM wiring. On the Kroon harness, there is this extremely hard PVC sleeve that just will not bend. And with all of these thicker aftermarket vacuum lines that are on here, I just cannot get this wiring harness routed in a way that makes sense and will allow me to get it in between the charge pipe and the AFM and get it able to be plugged in. Now, if this sleeve was not here, it would be a piece of cake because it would be a lot more flexible. And honestly, there's not a lot of heat in this part of the engine. Well, I mean, these engines create a lot of heat, but at least it's not up against the turbo, and the parts that are closer to the turbo don't have that sort of sleeve on it. So I may dig out my old harness and see if there was one of those sleeves on there. And if not, maybe I could try to get rid of this. So I'm basically at a stopping point right now. I don't want to just jam everything in here and possibly ruin this new harness or anything. So I think I'm going to take a look at that old harness and see what it looks like. Okay, so here is the original harness, and it did have a little bit of a thicker sleeve on it. But as you can see, even as old as it is still pliable. So there was some sort of extra protection on this from the factory. But if we go and look at the Kroon one, this is solid PVC. This does not move at all. So I'm going to have to do some thinking on this and try to figure out how I want to move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and end this video now. It's kind of a bummer that I had to end it on a little bit of a sour note, but it is what it is. So do me a favor, if you have a 944 turbo and you have one of these Kroon harnesses, did yours have a PVC sleeve by the AFM connector? And if so, is it rock solid or is it pliable at all? Let me know what you think in the comments. So if you enjoyed this video or you found it helpful at all, I'd appreciate it if you give me a like. Be sure to subscribe so you'll be notified the next time I post a video on this project 944 Turbo, and hopefully in the next video, this thing will be running. I appreciate you hanging around this long, and I'll catch you on the next one.